So Halloween is nearly upon us again. Second time for us.
Yep, it is, yep.
So we thought we'd do another month. Last year we did a month of horror films, spooky films. So we thought we'd do that again. Pick a film each, running up to Halloween at the end of the month. And some more spooky ones for your...
Delectation.
Exactly, that. So we're going to start off, although we're actually doing two this week, because we're doing an original and a remake, and we've chosen to do Nosferatu. So Nosferatu, the original one, was made in 1921, but it was released in 1922 by FW Murnau, German filmmaker. And then there was a spiritual remake by Werner Herzog, also German, done in 1979. So obviously they're kind of the same plot, so you're going to just do a basic plot.
Yes, well, based on Bram Stoker's Dracula. So, yeah, I mean, if you've ever seen any Dracula film, then you pretty much know the plot. You've got Jonathan Harker, well, not in the original Nosferatu, but that character, his boss sends him to Transylvania. This count wants to buy some property, so he sends him with the papers to go and sign them. And when he gets there, he discovered he's a bit of a strange guy and likes to drink blood and sleeps in a coffin and all those vampire-y things.
Yes.
So, the Count obviously sees a picture of his wife and takes a fancy to her neck. And explicitly says, she has a lovely neck, as you do. And then makes his way back to where Jonathan, or whoever the character is called in whichever film you're watching, came from. And with him brings lots of rats, and they bring some sort of plague, and the townsfolk start to, drop like flies, basically.
They do.
And that's pretty much the plot of most.
This is pretty much the plot of Dracula, Nosferatu, all those kind of things. Yeah, so, that's kind of it. There's obviously there's some differences between the original one and the new one. And obviously the countless Count Dracula films that are out there as well. I suppose the big difference. So Nosferatu. The reason they made Nosferatu, or the original one anyway, was because they couldn't get the rights to Bram Stoker's Dracula. His wife, Florence, was still alive, and she wouldn't allow them to use, to have the rights for it, basically. So they just kind of changed a few things. They changed the title, they changed the character names, and they took out some of the plot things here and there. Although it is still essentially the original novel, so they still took them to court over it. Yeah. And originally, the film was they had a lot of prints destroyed of the film, but a few escaped, and they subsequently released it later. So, and then the next one, the Herzog one, that came along in '79. That went is like a loose remake of the Murnau one, but then it does feature the original names from the original book, because by that point the copyright had it become public domain at some point after 70 years.
Well, no, it's 70 years in the US, but it's not necessarily public domain in Germany, I don't think. So,
right.
But obviously, I guess he just paid for the rights. I don't
know.
Yeah.
So anyway, so by that point it was wherever it was public domain, and so Herzog came along and he was able to use the original names. But they are quite. I mean, obviously they're quite similar. I think they're different enough because the time between them, but they are quite similar films. So maybe just talk about the first one a little bit first.
Yep.
Obviously we are now 1921, so we are in silent. Our first silent movie on the channel.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So we've gone quite far back for this one. This is one I've seen quite a lot. I quite like this film. Obviously silent films are different because there's no sound. Obviously, and I always thought silent films quite interesting because they're all about the visuals, and that's there's obviously there is you have the intertitles, so you do have a story there, but for the most part it is about the visuals, which I've always quite liked. And this film has a very distinct feel to it. Yeah, I mean it's part of the German expressionist cinema movement, which features things like Metropolis and Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
That's the one.
And many other films that came out around that time. And I think you can usually tell them by, I think they have quite high angles and sharp building edges. I mean, this one's not too much. It's not too much like that. It's not too artistic in that way, but it's definitely got a strange style to it. And then, of course, the famous Orlok Nosferatu, the Dracula himself. Max Shreck here does it quite very suitably creepy.
He is. Yeah, I mean, obviously there was a film, what was it, 2000 I think, wasn't it, called Shadow the Vampire, which presupposed that he was a real vampire.
Yes.
And because there's not a lot known about him. Obviously he was an actor, he didn't really look like that, but yeah, they sort of ran with that aspect and made out like he was eating members of the crew. And
yeah, that's a really good film. Well, if you haven't seen that one, Willem Dafoe and John Malkovich playing Murnau. Yeah, that's really good, that one. Yeah, I mean, I think there's possibly there is a slight myth around this film anyway. I mean, possibly a film that gets kind of, a lot of copies of it get deleted and being so old, being about a vampire. I mean, there is a strange mythology to vampires themselves anyway. Obviously, we've had, like I said, countless Dracula films over the years. Do you have a favourite Dracula film?
Oh, Coppola one, I would
The
have to
Coppola
say,
one,
yeah.
okay. It's a good film, that. I did enjoy it. I do have a bit of a soft spot for Christopher Lee's original Count Dracula and some of the other ones he did as well. But we're not here to talk about Dracula himself. We're here to talk about Nosferatu. But there is obviously lots of them out there.
I mean, a lot of them obviously just take the character and it's a completely different plot.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but this one, I think this is an interesting film. I have to say, I personally haven't seen a huge amount of silent cinema. I've seen a few others by FW Murnau. Saw his film Sunrise, and he did a version of Faust as well, which is really good. I've seen a lot of silent comedy, so I like a lot of the old Lauren Hardys and Buster Keatons and stuff like that. But silent films, I haven't seen a huge amount of in my life, so I don't really have a lot to compare to. But I think the Germans, I've seen quite a few of the German ones. I've seen Metropolis, things like that. So I think they're all usually quite stylistically well put together, and this is eerie as well. This film, I think it is creepy, and it is eerie.
Yeah, it is creepy, and obviously there's so many images in it that are iconic, and so I felt like I'd seen half of it, and being such a fan of the Coppola version, the plot, I knew what was going to happen. Although obviously it is changed slightly. I mean, Orlok he looks different. He's got teeth at the front rather than the fangs here. They're at the front like a rat, and obviously there is a big sort of plague theme to it. He's not. It's less about sucking people's blood, and more about him being sort of a carrier of a plague and bringing all these rats with him and things like that. So it's not the traditional sort of vampire thing that we know of now.
No.
And interestingly, in the original book, sunlight only weakens Dracula. But in Nosferatu, that's what it is fatal to vampires, and that's where that came from. In most vampire films now, that is an established part of
pretty much it, isn't it?
The vampire lore, and that's where it came from. It didn't come from the book; it came from this film.
Of course, it's got some quite iconic shots in there. Obviously, the one with him, kind of leaning upwards, which is quite creepy, and then the famous the shadow up the stairs as well, which is an amazing shot, and the long fingernails and fingers. It's definitely one to check out if you like horror films and you've never seen it. It's kind of like the original horror film. It may have been.
I mean, there were other vampire things I think before it, but a lot of them are lost forever. But this one just about is just about hung on. So it wasn't the first horror film, but I think it's definitely, for its time, it had a lot more dread behind it. I think people of that time, they weren't used to that sort of film where and it was far more scary. To us now, there's far more horrific films.
Well, yeah, exactly.
that have been made in the last 100 years, but at the time, it was a different kind of horror.
So then jump forward a few decades. And up to 1979, and you get a new version of it, this time by Werner Herzog. So also a German version of the film. Well, there's two versions of the film. There's an English one and a German language, so they filmed twice. They didn't just dub it this time. Herzog himself, I think at some point he did say that he thought Nosferatu was like the greatest German film ever to come out of Germany, obviously. So this is different because it's kind of like a spiritual remake of the original film because it's called Nosferatu, although the characters in it are called the names that feature in the book. So you do have Count Dracula and John Harker and Lucy Harker and Mina, although they're swapped round.
Yeah, those names are reversed for some reason. Yeah, it's a bit strange.
Quite strange. And then Renfield, who is the lunatic, who is in the black and in the silent one, he's called something else in that, isn't he? I can't remember his name in that. But in this one, he is Renfield is the character from the book. And then Van Helsing also turns up in this. Not a lot.
No, he's only briefly.
He's not in the silent version of it. Obviously, Van Helsing is the famous. He's like a doctor, isn't he? Is he a doctor?
Yeah,
kind of psychic doctor.
I mean, in the Coppola version, he sort of knows all about vampires, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah, he's much more. He knows about the kind of the lore and the legend and all that kind of stuff, which does kind of come up in not so much in Herzog's one, but actually in the original one, there is this book that tells you all about the spirits and the ghost the legends of Transylvania and vampires and things like that. So he's kind of Helsing in the book, and the Coppola version is more about that kind of knowledge of vampires and things.
Yeah, that character is basically replaced by a book.
Basically, yes, exactly. So we have Klaus Kinski playing Count Dracula himself, or Nosferatu. I think it's quite interesting that there was because it's obviously famous that Herzog and Kinski worked together a few times, but didn't always see eye to eye.
No,
and you just have to watch Aguirre, Wrath of God, or read about that one to know all about the fun times they had making that film. And in this one, it was kind of no different. I think Kinski wanted to play this role more energetic and to be kind of, faster and run around more. And Herzog was like, no, I want you to just play it kind of solemn, much like the original one. And I think they had a bit of a falling out over that. So the way to fix that was Herzog basically made Kinski have a bit of a tantrum every time before shooting and wore him out. So he'd be, raging and everything, wore him out, and then shot it. So he was too tired to play the role too energetically, which I think about sums these guys up. But he's pretty. I think he works well as Nosferatu. You weren't so keen.
I prefer the original. I think he's more creepy. But I think the thing is, obviously, Max Shreck. I don't think I've ever seen another Max Shreck film.
No, God.
but obviously, Klaus Kinski is recognisable, even with the makeup on. So you kind of
you do notice him.
Whereas you can in the original you can buy into him being an actual vampire, like Shadow Vampire suggests. That's
you
probably
don't know him as more
exactly. Yeah, he's not as
that,
recognisable, and I think maybe the makeup is a bit more extreme. I mean, he has pointy ears as well, which I don't think the Herzog version does.
Yeah, in the original one.
Yeah.
But in the original one, he almost passes for a real person. There are times. This one, he's like always looks like he's going to jump on you. Do you know what
I don't know what you mean.
Well, Kinski's one, I think there are scenes in the silent one where he doesn't have the teeth, or his mouth is shut more of the time.
Right,
the teeth is basically, they're always there on in Herzog's one. So he constantly looks menacing. Whereas in the original one, there are moments when you first meet him, he looks odd, obviously, but he does look kind of okay. If I got to that castle and I saw Kinski, straight away I'd be like, I'm going home. There's no way I'm spending a night alone in the castle with this guy, but that guy, maybe not so bad.
Yeah. Really? No, I find the Shreck one creepier.
When he's like all out and doing his blood sucking thing, he is creepy. I don't know. I think they're both. I find the Kinski one quite creepy as well. And I think that scene actually, obviously the famous scene where Jonathan Harker cuts his thumb on his bread knife, and then he goes for the blood. I think the one in I mean, they're both like, if anyone did that to you, you'd be like, oh yeah, what the hell's going on here?
Straight out the front door, wouldn't you?
But the Herzog one, the way he shoots that is really quite, quite ominous and really, really quite scary. But no, I know what you mean. I think Max Shreck, there's that kind of mysterious.
I think maybe the Shreck one has his hands up more, and the claws are maybe a bit longer, so that makes him look a bit creepy because he's constantly walking around like this all the time with his long nails.
Yeah, and I think also the fact that it being an older film and a silent film gives that kind of creepiness to it, that edginess maybe more so than the Herzog one. I think it's really good. I think it's a really interesting film. I think it's I like how, again, we've said before, I like how Herzog films his thing. I think he's clearly, he shoots films really beautifully, and I think this one, there's lots of the colours in it are really great, and when he's down, obviously, I mean, that's the big difference between, say, this one and Coppola's Dracula, is that Coppola's Dracula, the whole film is filmed in America, whereas this one, obviously, he does go out to, not Transylvania itself, but he films a lot it's filmed in Slovakia or Czechoslovakia as it was known back when this was filmed. And so you are filming in Eastern Europe.
Well, the original one did as well.
And the original one did as well, yeah, but I'm just saying the difference between Dracula films.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Most Dracula films tend to be, although a lot of them are great, they're all very Hollywoodized, aren't they? It's almost like Nosferatu. The two Nosferatu films kind of got it right because they feel creepier, authentic and darker, and they're dealing with quite dark places. And I like the scene where Jonathan Harker first gets to Transylvania, and he's like with all those gypsies, and they're like real gypsies. There's no whitewashing going on here. They're like real gypsies from Eastern Europe, and there's just that kind of authenticity that I don't think any of the Dracula films, unless I'm mistaken, they all seem to be. Even right back to the kind of Universal monster version of Dracula, they're all quite Hollywoodized and westernized, I think, and that's why I like the Nosferatu films themselves. There's some very visually stunning, eerie moments here, especially the rats.
I was impressed with the rats. Yes, the rat wrangler obviously did a good job because there's a lot of rats.
There's a lot of rats. Yeah.
Although apparently some of them maybe weren't treated very well.
No, there was apparently quite a bit of animal cruelty that was going on with them.
What I thought of it while I was watching, what the comparison I made is to the original Nosferatu what the Gus Van Sant Psycho was, the original Psycho. That's what made me think, because there were some shots that were lifted, was felt like they were very similar, and obviously the plot, apart from changing the names, and it was maybe beefed up a bit. Obviously, it felt very similar because it's essentially the same film. It was just like a talky colour version of the same film, whereas the Gus Van Sant Psycho was a colour version of the same film.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's probably closer because that was literally not quite shot for shot, but almost.
Yes, I think there's definitely scenes in this, and I think he probably did it on purpose. There are definitely recreated same shots from Herzog one as there is in Murnau's one. And
maybe not as redundant as the Psycho remake.
No. I think the Psycho remake was terrible. And Psycho was a great film, but in this one, I think they both have their own. They both work as well as for me personally. I like them both.
I mean, I think the Herzog one obviously, like I said, beefs up the plot a bit, and I think gives Dracula a bit more background and a bit more motivation, whereas in the silent one, you don't really know much about him. Obviously he wants to move to somewhere else to spread his plague or whatever.
Well, I think also that's the difference, and this is maybe what's maybe more similar to the Dracula itself, the original story and the films, is that, like you say, the whole taking the plague with him, whereas this one is more sexual, isn't it? This one
he talks about being lonely, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is touching on that kind of sexual tension between him. Although he does in both situations, the first thing they see is the neck or the throat in Herzog's version of Lucy Harker's neck. But this one has clearly got that sexual tension going on that I think most of the Dracula films has.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really feature in the silent version. We didn't talk about the music in the original one, and they both have quite interesting scores. This one has as done by Popol Vuh. They've worked with Herzog quite a few times over the years, and I really like the music in Herzog's one. I think it's very haunting. I think it works really well.
It was a bit too many monks singing over it for my liking. That's what it sounded like anyway.
I like chanting in music anyway, so it didn't bother me so much, and I found it's quite hypnotic. I mean, that's the other thing. I found both films are quite hypnotic films.
Obviously, in the original, in the silent one, music is all you have audio-wise.
Well, it is.
But I mean, it depends what version you watch as to what music you get. I mean, I think the original, some of it's lost. So depending on what version you watch, it's either quite close to the original music or it's nothing like it.
Because also if you go back to the silent period, any scores were played when the film was running, because it was never recorded with the film, because that didn't come up. It wasn't another 10 years before sound. You got recorded sound with a film. You go to the film you go and see it in the cinema or wherever they were playing it, and you had someone playing it alongside you. And a lot of the time that was just an organist. So I don't know what the original score for this would have been. I mean, there was the version I saw of it does have a score on it. Well, the beginning's a score, the end of the score, and then the rest of it's kind of like a droning,
droning sort of creepy background music. Yeah, it's got a bit irritating after a while, I've got to say.
It's kind of the same thing.
Change
the
it
whole
up
film.
a bit. But none of it really related that much to what was going on screen, particularly, did it?
No, but again, that's, I suppose, music I don't think worked for film back then like it does today. Nowadays, it's much more about, certain cues and it really, obviously composers, they make their music. They watch the film while they're making it, while they're putting it together. So it's much more part of the film today than it was back then. So we should obviously talk about the versions, what releases exist of these films. So obviously Nosferatu, the original silent version, there's loads. Yeah. It has been restored many times, and there are loads of different versions of it out there. I've got the Eureka version. It's actually really nice Blu-ray, and it's got lots of quite interesting, film notes and essays and commentaries and all that kind of stuff. This was restored in 2006, this one. Yeah. But there have been lots of versions of it over the years.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of black and white version. Obviously, the original film was tinted because it was all filmed in daylight. Obviously, Dracula or Nosferatu, sunlight's deadly to him, so you can't go outside during the daytime. But because it was all shot at daytime, because they didn't have the facility to shoot at night. They tinted it to sort of a cyan, blue, greeny hue to represent nighttime, but in the black and white version there is no colour, so you can clearly see that he's walking around in daytime, which doesn't make any sense when when he's then killed by sunlight. So if you're going to watch it, I would go for the tinted one. There's like an orangey hue for daytime, and there's a couple of other colours for different scenes. But it gives it a more interesting look, and it makes more sense, obviously, from the sunlight point of view. But I think there are lots of versions out there that are black and white. And I think because it is public domain, those are usually the ones that are public domain. Because the restorations, because work's been done on them, they're not public domain.
They're not public domain. No. So if you want to see the one we've just talked about, then you need to buy this. I think the BFI did one as well.
BFI did one. I think it depends how pure you want it to be. That one's got German intertitles and English subtitles, whereas the BFI one I think just has English intertitles.
That's right.
It's up to you what you want. If you want the closest to the original, then obviously that one is the one to go for.
Probably the one to go for, yeah. And you may find it. I think it does. I have found one streaming on Amazon Prime, but it's not a very good one. I think it's just a black and white one, actually. I think that's all they've got the rights for on Amazon Prime, clearly. Go for this one. I picked this up it was pretty cheap, actually, on Amazon. It was only about £8, so £8 if you're Americans, obviously. I don't know what I'm talking about. So that's obviously the FW Murnau one. Murnau. German Murnau, probably. Then the Herzog one, I have it on DVD, but I don't know where my DVD is. But you can get it. It's quite hard to get though. It's not. There's no recent. I couldn't find any recent versions.
Probably out of print, I guess.
Out of print, so it's on Amazon, but it's quite expensive. It's got a nice cover though to it. Obviously, if I had it here, I'd show you. Just go and look it up on Google. It's fine. It's easy. So that was Nosferatu. 2 of them. And as always, we hope you enjoy this video. Leave us a comment in the comments below.
Yeah, don't forget to subscribe if you've enjoyed this video, and check out some of our other ones. There's some links over there. And join us on Twitter and Facebook, and come back next week for another one.